Welcome. You are about to watch a brief discussion connected to the film Nuremberg. My name is Stephanie Rosen. I'm a descendant of Holocaust survivors and a co founder of 3G Miami, a community of descendants who share our grandparents' survival stories in schools. These testimonies help students understand what can happen when hatred goes unchecked. We are grateful to the Telluride Jewish community for making this screening and conversation possible. I'm honored to be joined by two people who come to this story from very different but deeply connected places. First, we have Jack L. High. He is the author of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, the nonfiction book that inspired the film Nuremberg. He's also written The Lobotomist and The Lost Brothers. Jack's next book, The Case of the Autographed Corpse, will be published in fall of 2026. Hi, Jack.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we have Katie Triest. She is the granddaughter of Howard Triest, the American translator whose work is featured in the film. She's an educator and guide based in Telluride, Colorado, formerly director of education at the Wildlife Bird Fund in New York City. Katie now leads immersive birding experiences. So welcome to you both. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to direct the first question to Jack, but this is meant to be an interactive conversation, so please jump in at any time. So, Jack, what drew you to the story of Nuremberg, and how did it feel to see it brought to the screen? How accurately do you think the film portrayed the characters, and specifically Howard?
First, I want to say welcome to everyone in Telluride who came to see Nuremberg and to hear this discussion. I got interested and involved in this story quite some time ago when I was writing an earlier book called The Lobotomist. That book was about a different psychiatrist. And that psychiatrist had met Douglas Kelly in 1938 at a conference of the American Psychiatric Association, and he was really struck by Kelly. The main reason was that Kelly was at the conference not to present a paper or give a talk, but to give a magic show to an audience of psychiatrists, which I think is a very courageous thing to do. And it got me interested. And then I learned about Dr. Kelly's involvement at Nuremberg, a little about what happened to him afterwards. And that's what got me onto the trail of Dr. Kelly. It was otherworldly, I would say, to see this story become a movie, and a movie that I liked so much because some of the scenes are shown to be quite a lot like how I imagined them. And also, I'm very happy that the important messages of the book also transferred to the movie. A movie is a movie, so it's not going to be 100% factually accurate. But I think Nuremberg is mostly factually accurate, certainly in all the right places. Howard's part of the story was important because when I was doing my research, this was back in 2012, he was one of the few people still alive who had actually worked with Dr. Kelly at Nuremberg. There was Howard, and then there was another translator who I also tracked down. And I first came across Howard's book, a book that he had published. I found it as an Amazon Kindle book. I did call Howard, had a great and very informative phone conversation with him, and he added immeasurably to my book.
Katie, we'd like to ask you a question about your grandfather, specifically about him as a person. Can you try to explain, not just his role at Nuremberg, but who was he to you? And, can you describe a little more than what we saw on screen?
Yeah, growing up, I would describe him to all my friends as like a little Forrest Gump because he kind of did a bit of everything. But he was just truly like a very sweet and gentle guy. He had this traumatic and tragic experience, and he wasn't hardened by it per se. Like it definitely shaped a lot of a lot of how he interacted with the world after that. But he was sweet and gentle and just a kind, loving grandfather.
Well, this next question is for both of you. You both came to this story from very different places. Jack through historical research, and Katie from your family memory. How did those perspectives shape what stood out to you most about Nuremberg and Howard's role in it?
I'll start, Katie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please, Jack, go for it.
I usually go into projects like this not expecting a lot, because at the beginning I'm totally ignorant and am just learning as I go along. But what struck me about Howard's part of the story was that his role was so important to Dr. Kelly's role. I should explain quickly that Kelly was in Nuremberg with the assigned job of determining whether these 22 German defendants were mentally fit to stand trial, but he had his own project in mind that he didn't tell anybody about, which was to find out what psychological disorders they may have had in common that would account for their horrendous crimes that they committed. And Dr. Kelly depended a great deal on Howard because Dr. Kelly could not speak German. And some of the defendants spoke passable or good English, including Hermann Goering, but many did not. And so he was reliant upon Howard, not just for the translation, but he used Howard as a sounding board. They talked about stuff. And Howard even did things like interpreted the Germans' responses to the Rorschach inkblot tests that Kelly administered to the prisoners. Howard's own story about his family and his departure from Germany and time in Detroit and then returning to Germany as a member of the U.S. Army was such a neat circle. And it was wonderful for me to be able to include that in the book.
I'm not a big movie person. So coming into it, Hollywood, I'm sure, as you know, they never contact the families. So we had no idea what to expect going into it. And we could only hope that he was portrayed in the way that we see him. I think he would get a kick out of it. I think he would really enjoy how he was portrayed. And, it was mostly very accurate, like you were saying, Jack. It's true that he never told these Nazis that he was Jewish. He was sitting in the cells with these guys who had just murdered his parents and his family. And, Julius Streicher sat there and at one point was like, I can smell a Jew from a mile away. If they thought he was Aryan, he had blonde hair, blue eyes. And instead of like lashing out at these people that just murdered his family, he was calm and collective and saw it as his duty to just gather the information and use it against them, which I thought was remarkable. And I'm really grateful that that storyline played out in the movie because it really happened.
Wow. Well, Kitty, while you're speaking, could you take it just one step further? Could you tell the story quickly about how you met Leo Woodall, who played your grandfather?
Yeah, so we found out this movie was happening because one of my best friends was researching my grandfather's story. There's a documentary on him. And the first thing that popped up was Leo Woodall casted as Howie Trieste. And so she calls me and this was years ago. This was a few years ago. And I'm like, I have no idea what this means. And so like I said, Hollywood doesn't let us know anything. There's no way to get a hold of him. I had sent Leo Instagram message that I never expected a response from, and I didn't receive one. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm sitting on my porch in Telluride, just hanging out and watching all these famous people walk by for Film Fest. And I'm like, gosh, if all these other people are here, will Leo ever come here? I would love to meet him, And the movie was coming out in like a month at that point, or 2 months. And so I happened to just like chat GBT, like, hey, will Leo Woodall ever come to Telluride? And it goes, your lucky day. Leo Woodall is currently in Telluride for the premiere of Tuner. I was like, no way. So this is like 11 o'clock at night. By 11:30 the next morning, Telluride's a very small place. I was able to find him, and it was such an incredible experience. I was like, hey, are you Leo? He's like, yeah. I'm like, this is so weird. My name is Katie Trieste. You're playing my grandfather in Nuremberg. And, he shed tears. We shed tears. We hugged and we got to chat. And it was a wild and wonderful experience. And just his reaction was just so settling to me. Like to know that he, and after our conversation was just that he like genuinely cared, which, I didn't have any expectations because I knew nothing and it's Hollywood. So you don't have much. I don't have any expectations about what comes out from there and who these people really are. And he was so sweet and so kind. He invited us to the premiere. We went to Toronto to watch the premiere a few weeks later. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience. And he's a mensch.
Wonderful. Ah, beautiful. Well, that sounds like, I think you both know what Beshert means, but the
Yeah.
way that story came together and the fact that you were both at the premiere, I just think the whole thing sounds, really Beshert. So one last question for both of you, just to quickly wrap up. What do both of you think? What would you hope that people take away from the movie? Mm.
I think there's a lot to be said about the timing of this movie coming out, even though Jackie wrote this book a long time ago, I believe. I would hope my grandfather growing up always said to me and always said to my father growing up, this can happen again. And I don't think anyone truly believed him at the time, but he's coming from a place of he grew up German, loved Germany. His father fought for Germany in World War One. So my grandfather very much considered himself German before anything. And so the fact that this could happen in his hometown, he was always very diligent in the idea that this could happen again and it can happen anywhere. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
That one of the lessons that Dr. Kelly drew from his experience is that this could happen anywhere, that people like that, like those German leaders, are always among us in every country, in every era of time. And that if we expect a war or a set of trials to put an end to them, we're going to be disappointed. And that we have to be prepared for their upsurge periodically. This is what Howard said about the German defendants. He said, I could sit next to these people, and when you looked at them and talked to them, they were like your neighbor from next door, like a regular person. They didn't look or act differently. They were just like anyone off the street. They looked like nice guys. You would not know that they had killed so many people. I knew too much about them, and I had too much personal history to be charmed by any of them. I knew what they would say, that anything they would say to charm would be a damned lie. They could charm on one hand and kill a million with another.
I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you for sharing your work and your memories and your perspectives. And thank you to everyone for taking the time to engage with this story. We hope this conversation adds another layer to understanding why memories like Nuremberg and people like Howard Guest matter so much.